Hello and welcome to the Secret Society of Man podcast, episode 23. My name is Zach. I'm here with my cousin Ryan. Today we have another true crime episode. We wanted to do this a couple weeks ago, but then Ryan's son came a little bit early, and so it messed up our scheduling. This is a documentary that just came out on Netflix about the case of Jonbenet Ramsey. It's a case I had heard about before, Ryan had not, so we watched the documentary. We put our thoughts together. I also watched some other documentaries to investigate the case further. This is a somewhat frustrating case because now 20 years later, 30 years later. Yeah, 30 years later. This happened in 1996. This crime happened, and we still don't know what happened. There's many theories online. It's one of those things where people have put a lot of research into it. There's a lot of different ways to look at the same evidence, and there's really no definitive answers. Hopefully one day we get some, but right now we don't. So here's the facts of the case. Back in 1996, on Christmas, the Ramsey family had gone over to their friend's house for a dinner party about 5:30 p.m. They left about 8:30, and when they got home, Jonbenet, the daughter of the family, who I believe was 9 years old at the time, she was supposedly sleeping when they got home, and they put her straight to bed. They have another child. His name is Burke Ramsey, the older brother, and I think he was 9, and Jonbenet might have been a little bit younger.
I think 7.
Okay, 7.
So, yeah.
Okay, so she was 7, Burke was 9, and they put Jonbenet to bed, and then in the morning, Patsy Ramsey, the mom, wakes up and goes downstairs, and she finds on one of the steps going downstairs a ransom note, and the note read, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We're a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She's safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You'll withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. When you get home, you'll put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise that you be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence a earlier delivery pickup." Delivery was crossed out, then they wrote pickup of your daughter. "Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The 2 gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise that you do not provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert the bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You'll be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It's up to you now, John." And it's signed Victory SBTC. So she finds this note, and shortly after that, she calls the police. There's recordings of the police call where basically she's screaming frantically, and she calls the police. They arrive. They try to get the scene under control. Now, a big part of the mystery of this case is that the police tactics and procedures here are very flawed. One of the biggest issues is they allowed the family to go wander around the house. They even invited neighbors and other friends around. And when John, the dad, was wandering around the house, he ends up coming back upstairs with Jonbenet's body. He finds her body dead in one of the rooms of the basement, and they show the police, and that's the mystery. They were looking for it was a kidnapping, but she was dead in the basement the entire time. And from there, sort of starts all the scrutiny of the evidence. One last thing is the Ramseys, the parents, pretty much lawyered up right away, and then they they sort of fly to a different state, and they're not really being that cooperative with police. But we'll get into that. So to sort of add a structure to this, we decided that we would take a look at the three main theories. So number one is that the parents did it. Number two is that Burke, the brother, did it, as in like it was some sort of tantrum or rage. He accidentally kills his sister, and then the parents cover it up. And then the third theory is that an intruder actually did do it, and that is the correct way that things happened. So what are your thoughts aimed at how maybe the Ramseys looked as parents and as suspects?
So, it's very common. Like the first, you have to look at, especially with the age of the person, with her, Jonbenet, you have to look at the parents as suspects. It's just, it has to be that. Like, they were the last people to see her that they're aware of, and therefore they have to be ruled out. Like, there is none of that.
Well, they can't be ruled out, you mean? You said they have to be ruled out, but they...
Well, right. Yeah. Like, but correct. Like, you have to consider them and take a look into them and whether or not you think that they are whatever happened.
Because, like, statistically, I mean, isn't it right that most of the time, if it's like a family killing, it's
somebody
the parents?
Close. Well, that or it's somebody close.
And like then how much more does that increase when the body is found in the family home?
Yeah, so I was going to get to that. So what's interesting is... Now, I'm almost, and correct me if I misheard the documentary on this, but I had thought the police left the scene, didn't find her. They came back at a later time, told them to recheck their house, and that's when he found them. Not like the initial time they showed up, like, because apparently they did a sweep, couldn't find her. And then later they come back, I can't remember if it's the same day or the same week, whatever. And they're like, well, we're just going to re-sweep your house, and asked the parents, did you check the basement? And then he goes and checks, and she's there.
Yeah, because I know that, I don't know if the police were present the entire time, but
Sure.
I do know that the police were called right away in the morning.
Yes.
But then the body was found around 1 p.m.
Okay, yep.
So it was quite a bit of time.
Yep. Okay, so anyway, as far as like the odds go of it being in the same house, yes. I think the biggest thing that I have an issue with the ransom note is there is not a single person that there's no chance that you would leave a body in the house that you're holding for ransom. It's one thing to kill them, because if you kill them and take them out of the house, they don't know if they're alive or not. So they can still follow through with what you're asking them. But to leave a body there when that is your sole like leverage, that doesn't make any sense. That's stupid. That's dumb.
Yeah.
So I find it really hard to believe that this group, Victory Group or whatever, said that, or that it was them, that it was some ghost group that targeted this guy. It just doesn't make sense to me. Now, does that mean that it was them? No. It's just really weird that if I'm holding you for ransom, I'm not going to leave you in the fucking building where the victims are. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think that from any perspective, whether you're looking at it from the Ramseys or Burke or an intruder, it's hard to figure out what the intention of that letter was. So like focusing on the parents, trying to imagine what they were trying to accomplish. And even within these three theories, there's all these different variations. So like you could look at it like, well, both the parents did it. Or you could say that one of them did it and the other one didn't know about it. So if you think about what would John's motivation be, one theory that I've heard is that he did it for whatever his motivation was. He killed Jonbenet, whether it was by accident or whatever. Well, he writes the letter as an obvious diversion, right? Trying to pretend like it was a kidnapping, maybe just to buy him time. Because one very important part of the letter is that they say, don't talk to the police.
Right.
So it's possible that he wrote the letter and he wanted Patsy to find it in the morning, but then not call the police, go to him and say, what do we do? And he can say, well, let's not call the police. I'll handle it. Maybe send his family out somewhere. Well, he has time. And that'll give him time to like clean up the scene and like get rid of the body and things. Well, then what actually ended up happening is she read the first sentence, we have your daughter, and just completely freaked out, didn't read the rest of it, and then called the police. And by the time that she called the police, it was too late for John to carry out his plan, and that kind of messed things up. So that's one way to look at it. Now, a couple things that the documentary mentioned about this letter in particular, like this is something that is obviously like the key piece of evidence, right? People trying to figure out who wrote it. Well, this was written on a notepad that is found in the house. So the notepad belongs to the Ramseys. And so if it was an intruder, maybe they would have had to take it, they stole it, right, and wrote it while they were in the house. But they found it with a page that had the start of the letter written out. So they had another page that had written out Mr. and Mrs. I, but they forgot to say Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey. So then they flipped to the next page, then they wrote out the note, and then they ripped it out and put it on the staircase. So that indicates that, if people think that maybe Patsy started to write it, and then she messed up, she went to the next page, but they forgot to get rid of that first draft of the letter. That's a highly suspicious thing. Like if it was a pre-planned thing, like why would you break into a house, kidnap the daughter, kill her or whatever, and then write the letter out before you leave? Wouldn't you want to get out of there as soon as possible?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. The whole idea that this group took her, I think, is asinine. I don't think that happened.
Right.
There's just too many holes in that. So, like and that's part of the documentary, and obviously for people listening, there are going to be spoilers in here, so just be aware of that. But you can't, as the show ended, like you can't rule out the parents. You just can't. Now Patsy's dead, so you can't charge her anyway. But Dad's still alive. And the other thing too wasn't there like sperm on her or something like that? Like there was DNA, whether it was saliva or sperm, something. But it did come back as inconclusive to be the family's DNA. So
yes.
So there's that too, right? It's like, okay, well, it's not coming back to the 3 that were in the house at the time, her family members, which kind of points away from, okay, was it an intruder, right? Like how can you say it was the parents? Because that if I'm a defense attorney, that's something I'm going to hang my hat on for sure. I'm going to hang my hat on the police just destroyed that scene, like not in a good way. But how can you, if you're like, well, yeah, she was sexually assaulted, how and the DNA didn't come back to the parents, how are you going to point to the parents? Unless they were in on like paying somebody to make it look like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, there's that.
So, I mean, there's a lot of theories that, like, she was being sexually assaulted, like ongoing, right? And then, again, that's something that typically happens from someone close to the child. Mm-hmm. And one of the theories that leads into this is that the reason that she was killed is because to cover up, like, the sexual assault or something, right? That's one of the motivations, potentially, for the parents to do it. As far as the DNA, that is another frustrating part about it because, like, that should be something that helps easily solve it, but it didn't match anybody, and the DNA file is called like unknown male 1, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that it does point away from the family, but then that documentary did mention that it's hard to say for sure that it points either to or away from the family because the evidence was tampered with mm-hmm. whenever they let John pick up the body and bring it upstairs. Like, how can you say for sure that him touching the body didn't somehow ruin the evidence, right. DNA or any other physical evidence? Mm-hmm. And so that's what makes it tough. So they can't really go too much off of that. Now, it could be that one day, whoever did it, maybe they've avoided the police and they haven't had to get their DNA taken and we just don't have that person's DNA. And one day they're going to get pulled over with drugs in their car and then they're going to get their DNA taken and the case will be solved. But that also might not happen. So I guess one other thing is, there's a lot more to talk about there, but I wanted to ask you about your opinion on the behavior of the Ramseys. A lot of times with these cases, people, they really look into how people are acting, whether it's during an interrogation, their body language, or in this case, there really wasn't an interrogation or really a formal sit down with police. The first thing they did was they lawyered up, they flew to a different state, and they said in interviews that they're cooperating with police. That's technically true, where if they're asked for things, I guess they would provide it. But usually when police say, we want to speak with you, they want like a sit-down, formal, prepared interview where they can really ask these questions, and that never really happened. Now, from a self-preservation standpoint, lawyering up if you're suspected of a crime makes sense. And John, in one of his interviews, I think on CBS or something, he said that the reason they lawyered up is because their friend was an attorney. And he said, hey, listen, I can see that you're going to probably end up being a suspect in this case. If I was you, I would lawyer up. And then he represented them. Now, both parents ended up having two different attorneys, which is interesting because that indicates that maybe they have different interests in the case.
It is strange.
Which is weird. But as a police officer, what do you think of... what does it indicate to you when somebody in their situation lawyers up? Is that like a suspicious move at all or no?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't think so. And here's why. We're talking about a fucking murder here. Like, this isn't like, hey, I found like a baggie of meth in your car and like you're like, well, I want to lawyer up. It's like, okay, well, that to me is more suspicious of like, why? Like, you're the only one driving the car. Like, there's other things going with it, right? We're talking about a serious crime here. And if I were in that position, I absolutely would lawyer up. Like, I think you would be dumb not to. I think it would be understandable. Now, when emotions are high and stuff, and, they said several times in that documentary that this local police department did not get many homicides. So I'm sure there was a lot of emotions riding on that. And I'm sure at the time when they heard that they lawyered up, that they were like, yep, this is them. Like, this is it, right? They probably knew that, well, yeah, I would too. If police are going to be asking me questions, like, I want to make sure I don't say something stupid that could get me further back than where I am now. You know what I mean? I think when you're dealing with a serious crime like that, I don't think anyone would, I don't know. To say it would cause suspicion is kind of a stretch. I think it would raise an eyebrow just a little bit, just to be like, well, because there's always that saying, right? If you got nothing to hide, you can say, I don't want to talk with you. Okay, and then if you find out you're being charged, then you can get a lawyer at that point. Because all the lawyer's going to do is say, don't say anything. Mm-hmm. So you can do that on your own volition. And if they eventually come to charging, then call the lawyer. To do it that early, I think, maybe there is something to them being super extra scared for some reason, a little cautious. Might be something to that, but I don't know. You can never say what you would do because we'll never be in that situation. You know what I mean? I don't know. Are there odds that we could be in that situation? Yeah. Like, unfortunately, like, we don't want one of our family members dying. But, but the odds of that happening, we will never be able to say I would do this exactly because it's like, well, we're not in that position. You know what I mean? Yeah,
and it's a tough balance to strike between doing logically the safest thing to not end up in prison, which in this case, whether they lawyered up or not, they probably would be the prime suspects, just given the circumstances. Mm-hmm. Striking a balance between that and then also trying to be as helpful as possible, like throwing out your own self-preservation to try to find your daughter's killer. And it is tough to look at it like from a strategic point of view when it's such a tragic thing that happened. But they also are millionaires and like high performance type people, and like those types of people, I mean, they probably have attorneys like on retainer. They
100%.
think about legal consequences more probably than the average person.
And honestly, probably more civil consequence than criminal.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want to lose all that money. You know what I mean?
But they're
like,
prepared to think about situations because they have those
Correct.
business legality worries and the civil worries.
Yeah.
Like they probably think about that quicker than another person. Like for me to go retain an attorney like would be such a weird thing for me to do.
Right.
But they probably interact with attorneys more on a regular basis than normal people do. One interesting part of this was going back to the letter. The handwriting analysis, and the documentary didn't really touch on this because I will say I think that the documentary was a little bit biased towards trying to make the Ramseys innocent. So they had the John Ramsey, who is the only living parent left, talk a lot in that interview, and so I think that it would be hard to get that guy to come out and give his statement if you're going to be like trying to incriminate him in the documentary, right? So it was very much trying to point blame away from the Ramseys, in my opinion, compared to some other things you might hear if you do some additional research. So looking at this letter, which I, again, think is some of the best evidence out there, there's handwriting analysis techniques, and that's a good way to try to figure out who wrote something. That's why, like, one of the cliche ransom note things is that they print out pieces from all these magazines so that way they don't have to write it out, because then they're going to be able to figure out who it is. Well, there's a lot of similarities between that ransom note and Patsy's handwriting. So it has a lot to do with the way that she connects her letters. Like, she likes to connect like the horizontal stroke of the T to the following letter when possible, and things like that. And you can look at the word electronic. That is a word that is contained in that ransom note, and then a sample from her other handwriting. And the way that she writes it out, where like there's 3 letters that are paired in the middle that all have the same like stroke connecting them, and then like it's written in the exact same unique way. That would be kind of hard to find a match for. It's not very common. What are the chances that the criminal writes electronic in the exact same way, connecting all the same letters as she does? And so I think that, the handwriting analysis makes me think that it was Patsy. And you have to ask yourself, why would that be? And there was a police officer that also came to the same conclusion, and he was in the documentary. And his theory was that there was some sort of dispute. His theory was that Jonbenet had wet the bed. And so they got into some kind of argument, and I guess that's a common reason for violence to occur on children, and like these high emotional outbursts because of bedwetting. That's a very big issue between parents and children. So Jonbenet wets the bed, they get into an argument, and then she, maybe went too far and pushed her or something like that, and she hit her head, and then everything after that, putting her body in the basement, she was found with a garrote, which is basically a cord tied between two pieces of, or on a piece of wood that was used to strangle her. All that stuff was done to cover up what actually happened. Now, another interesting thing about the case is that she was found with blunt force trauma to the head, but then also she was strangled with the garrote. And so there's a question of, was the strangulation like a cover-up and a diversion? Did the blunt force trauma to the head happen before that? Did she get pushed into something, right, out of anger, and then they did all that to cover up later? She also had duct tape on her mouth and everything. So she might have done that to cover up the body, and John may have known about it, may have not. But what do you think of that theory that the police officer had?
That the mom killed her?
Yeah, out of the bedwetting theory.
Yeah, man. I don't know. The problem with me with that is the sperm. It's hard to put the parents as the main suspect when she has sperm, DNA on her that is not of the parents.
Yeah.
Unless she works at a fucking sperm bank and has access to the sperm. That to me is just, it's too much for me to be the parents did it. I mean, it's just too much.
Yeah.
'Cause,
And
like,
do we know that it was sperm? Because
Was it saliva?
I'm fairly certain that it was just somebody else's DNA mixed in with the blood on her underwear. I'm pretty sure that's what it amounted to.
that may have been that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know that we know that it's sperm, but it's like the question is, how does a third party's DNA get into a child's underwear? Okay.
Right. I mean,
and which is close to sperm, but it isn't definitely sperm. Right. And so one thing related to that is they actually went as far as trying to track down the factory that made those garments. Mm-hmm. And they tested out all the workers in that factory to see if it was just some sort of like innocuous DNA left from it being produced or anything else, you know. So it is still valid, but I don't think it's as conclusive as sperm. And so I think that's why that alone doesn't rule out the family.
Sure.
Because, like, I mean, there technically can be any number of ways that a third-party DNA ends up on some clothing.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I guess I don't know. I don't think the mom... I think, could there be an argument over a bedwetting? Yeah, I think that absolutely could have happened. As far as murdering your child from it, and like you said, maybe it was accidental. Maybe she did push her too hard and fell and knocked her out or killed her, and then they tried to make it look like, you know, that. What I'm surprised about, though, is they did talk about the autopsy, and usually they can tell when somebody sustained injuries on a timeline. Mm-hmm. So they usually would be able to say, okay, the blunt force killed her, and then the ligature around her neck or chest area was after she was dead. So that could kind of give you a better timeline of, okay, what happened here? She wasn't choked out, and then her head slammed on the ground. So bottom line is no. I don't think the mom... I don't see the mom doing that. But again, I mean, it's how do you prove it? And that's the frustrating thing about this docuseries is that, like, there's just no way to prove it. There's no way to prove it, man.
Yeah.
And like I said, she's dead anyway, so both of them now. So I don't know. I mean, do you think it's possible she killed her and Dad didn't know about it? I mean, you got to think. We're talking about an argument here. Like a full-fledged argument, bumping around. Like, if you bang your head and die from it, dude, that's going to make a loud noise. Mm-hmm. You're telling me that Dad or the son wouldn't have heard something suspicious and say something to the police like, yeah, I heard like a scream and a bump at this time, and all of a sudden my mom was like, I saw her go back in the room like 20 minutes later, like, you know what I mean? Like, there would be something, some type of...
I agree with that. I think that it's unlikely that it came from an argument and then the other parent didn't know about it. So I think you're right there. Now, she is dead now, and we can't really ask her about it. They did do a couple of interviews, and so originally the story was, she said that she woke up and then went downstairs. She read the note, freaked out, went up to check on Jonbenet, noticed she was gone, then she called the police. But then, shortly after that, when they did an interview, I think just a matter of days or potentially weeks later, they were retelling the story, and she said that first thing she did was she went and she checked on Jonbenet, noticed she was gone, freaked out, went downstairs, then saw the note, and then called the police. So her story sort of changed, and that's like a big difference. Like, if sometimes small details will change, but if you're trying to think about like the main points of the story and like what she must have been feeling in that time, like the difference between those two scenarios is way different. Like, either you pick up the note and you're completely calm until you read it, or you pick up the note because you already know that your daughter's missing. Those are two very different scenarios. And anytime that people's stories change, well, then you think that, well, maybe they're making stuff up. And there's a couple times when the stories do change throughout, all these different details, and some having to do with the brother as well. Now, one potential explanation for that is you can tell in this interview that she's definitely like drugged up. Like, she was on a ton of anti-anxiety medications. She just was not acting right. And it's one of those things where you can look into, like, when someone's not acting right, like, does that mean that they're guilty or are they just in distress because of the situation? So like you might be able to give her credit and say just her recollection was bad because of the drugs, but that's a pretty big change in the story.
Yeah. Yeah, with death, everyone reacts differently to death. Like you never know how people are going to react to it and cope with it. The other thing that I thought about too, like to test the waters of is it the parents? But again, there's a stop to this. Is maybe they had a third party help them with this. My problem with that though is they would need a motive to kill their daughter. And to me, there's just not. It's not like their daughter was famous and they had a falling out and they wanted to kill her and get her money or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's no motive to kill your 7-year-old daughter, how young she was, whatever the age she was. There's no motive behind that to pay somebody to kill your own daughter. You're not getting any, like other than publicity, you're not getting anything out of it. You're not getting, maybe write a book later about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
I agree with that. I don't think that there would be any reason for them to believe that they intentionally did this as a premeditated thing.
Right.
Like, if they did it, it must have been an accident. Yeah. And they're covering it up.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So one more, I think 2 more things I want to mention. So the question you always ask yourself is like, well, how did somebody get into the house if it was an intruder? Yeah. Now, there's this weird situation where there was a window downstairs which was broken. And John said that the reason it was broken was because a while back he had locked himself out of the house, and so he had to go around to that window and break it and open up the latch, and he got into the house that way. And that is supported by the fact that there was cobwebs hanging down across that opening. Mm-hmm. And so there's also like dust, and there was just no sign that anybody had gone through that window that night. Apparently that type of spider doesn't even like spin its webs at that time of year because it's too cold. So any adult going through that window would have disturbed the spider webs or the dust. So nobody went through at that time. And then they also say that, he was adamant that the doors were locked though as well.
Yes.
Which is interesting. So there's really no way for somebody to have gone into the house. Now I did see that there was evidence of like a footprint in the house, like in the basement in that area, and so that indicates that maybe somebody was down there. And they say that nobody in that family had owned one of those types of boots before, but again, the crime scene wasn't well documented, so nobody knows for sure who was down there at that time. So it's like anytime you see evidence, it's like, well, maybe not because it wasn't handled very well. Like these are all things that could have easily led to this being figured out, but it was completely botched. So that window thing kind of comes into play later with Burke because of his interview. But that's just one thing to note is like nobody really knows how somebody got in, and so that sort of leads someone to believe that it was somebody within the house. Now, also, the murder weapon, the garrote thing, was everything it belongs to the Ramseys. So the weapon was made by breaking a paintbrush in half, one of Patsy's paintbrushes, and then tying a cord around it. So, like, that belonged to her. And so that suggests that maybe that's something she was familiar with. But sort of like you said, like to kill your daughter, I mean, even that's one thing, killing your daughter in a fit of rage or whatever, but then to do something brutal like that just doesn't really make any sense. That probably doesn't line up with how a parent would do that. Like if you look at all those similar sort of cases, I don't think it typically happens through strangulation like that.
That's more of a lover thing, like high intense violence. Yeah, like where they're stabbed like 50 times or something like that. That's more of like between male, female lover, or just like any sexual partner. But yeah, with your own child, that doesn't really match up.
Yeah,
with that, so.
A little too brutal.
Yeah.
So then, to finish up with focusing on the Ramseys, the one thing I didn't like was they had an interview with this one female cop, and she also believed that it was the Ramseys. But the way that she like pointed to that didn't really sit right with me. Like, she said that she was there, and she said,
yeah.
John wasn't acting right.
Yeah.
His daughter just died, and he was just sitting there checking the mail. Like, he just wasn't acting right. And then when he brought the body up, then I knew that the killer was still in the house. I knew absolutely. And I put my hand on the gun because I knew that, it's possible that one of us wouldn't be here when backup arrived or whatever. Like, she had this demeanor to her, like it was just way too overdramatic. She claimed like she knew for certain that he had done it, when really she didn't state any actual evidence.
No.
And I felt like that wasn't very cop-like of her.
It's very reckless to be like, man, like, they ordered a pizza instead of flowers for the funeral. Like, it's like, well, person's got to eat.
Yeah.
And he does. I mean, bills are still coming. Banks don't care that your daughter died. They're still asking for mortgages and stuff. So, yes, he's going to check the mail. And like he said, it was for in case he received another letter or something like that, right? That was... to be honest with you, I don't even know why they put her in there. Like, if I were her, I would have denied that interview, because that just makes her look so much worse.
It looked like she was just feeding for attention. Like, it was just a really weird angle to come from as a police officer.
Strange.
Like, at least the guy that came up with that bedwetting theory, even though there's problems with that, like, there's no evidence that the bed was actually wet.
Correct. Yeah.
Like, things like that. At least he was, like, trying to form something off of evidence and what he knows as much as any of us can, then nobody can come up with a definitive theory. It's just one theory that he came up with. But she just like was going off his gut feeling. And it was very weird. It just seemed like it was disparaging.
Yeah.
And like she just wanted some sort of like spotlight. It was very odd.
Yeah.
And so, it's possible that some of these cops were just like out to get them just because they feel they know how these things go, and they weren't really giving them a fair shake.
And that went in the paper. Do you remember that? They put that article in the paper like, she says she interviewed him or whatever, and she was dead set on it being him. Like, dude, they're lucky. Did the Ramseys ever sue them? Like, for defamation or something? Like,
I do believe, no, I don't know if they sued the cops, but they did end up suing, I think, CBS, because they had put out this documentary or show where they essentially just threw them all under the bus. Yeah, and it was just like nonsense. Like it just really wasn't based on anything. And so they ended up suing that, and they got more millions. They were already millionaires, and then they got more millions of dollars based on that. So, I mean, that just goes to show you when there's cops like that'll be so adamant that it was you just off of a gut feeling and no evidence, then, I mean, that's why you lawyer up, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, they definitely made the right choice by doing that. So, that is the theories on, how the Ramseys may have done it. Now, the second is that the brother did it, and then, the family covered it up, right? So there's a little bit less to go on here, but the main thread here is that that the kids were up longer than they said. So their story was that Jonbenet was tired and sleeping in the car and just went straight to bed. But there was pineapple found in her stomach, which was undigested. All the food that they had at the dinner party was digested. So that indicates that the pineapple was eaten after they got back. And it's pretty much well established that the kids enjoyed pineapple as like one of their favorite snacks. And I think there was a bowl of like half uneaten pineapple or whatever laying around. So that indicates that the kids were up longer than their original story. And also one of the things that they were adamant about, in addition to like all the doors were locked, they made sure that the cops knew that Burke was sleeping when the cops arrived. So the cops went up to his room and woke the son up. And it's a little bit odd, like if you wake up and you find that one of your children have been kidnapped by a small foreign faction, like why? On one hand, you don't want to, I guess you could say you don't want to disturb your son with all the commotion and worry him, but also he may be the only person that knew anything. So like, why would you not? Hey, Burke, do you know where Jonbenet is? Like, that seems like what you would do. But they didn't do that. They just let him sleep supposedly until the cops came. Now, in the police phone call, this has also been analyzed endlessly. You can hear a small voice in the background, like a really quiet voice, and it's one of those things where you can't for sure make out what it's saying. And I don't think this was covered in the documentary because, again, I think they tried to steer away from the Ramseys. But you can hear some small quiet voice in the background. Now, exactly what's being said is being speculated on, but there is theories that he's saying, like, are they going to arrest me, right? And you know what? I've tried to listen to this sound. Even after being told what I should be listening for, I can't make anything out. But regardless of what's being said, if that is Burke's voice, then they're lying. It doesn't matter what he's saying.
Correct.
If he's saying anything, then they're lying. He was awake when that phone call was being made, and then they told him to go and pretend like he was sleeping. And that's a pretty big lie. And really the only reason they would do that is to try and protect them somehow. And so it might have been something where they got, whether it's related to the pineapple or anything else, they got into some kind of argument and Burke like pushed her or hit her with something and didn't know his own strength. And she ended up dying. And then they come downstairs, they see what happened. They assume that she's dead. And so then they stage this to protect their son. And that the only other the only other hard piece of evidence I would say is they found on the body, in addition to like the blunt force trauma and the strangulation, these marks on her skin, and they're like a certain distance apart. Now, some have theorized, and they mentioned this in the documentary, that it might have been a stun gun. There was a particular brand of stun gun that has the prongs the same distance apart, but that doesn't really make any sense because like stun guns don't actually like knock people out.
No,
like it's a
that's
taser.
Hollywood fiction.
Yeah. So how, just like you said earlier with the noise, like how would somebody basically tase a child and then that not make enough noise to wake anybody up?
Right.
And
like not only the sound from the stun gun, but her screaming
exactly.
from the pain.
Like she's not, because she's not going to be silent.
No.
Like, so that's kind of ridiculous. And I'm pretty sure the people that put that theory forward are well familiar with that equipment and should know that that's not how that works. So it's kind of odd. But the alternative to that, and again, they didn't mention this in the documentary, but Burke had these train tracks where the prongs on them that connect the pieces are the exact distance apart from those marks on her body. And so, well, it probably wasn't a stun gun. It might be that he was like poking her with that to see if she's okay or something like that. So like there is an alternative theory that points to him. Now, the documentary also was not able to get a hold of him for an interview. He declined an interview. And they didn't show any of the footage of him being interrogated by police. But there is video footage out there of him being interrogated, and he's kind of just acting weird. But again, everyone acts differently.
Yeah, and he's a kid still.
And he's a child. And so the kids are kind of awkward anyways. Mm-hmm. But he's just like, you could tell that he is not being 100% honest, though, because they started out with the pineapple questions. They're like, did you guys have anything to eat? And they were asking, like, what do you normally have for a snack? And you can tell that he was deliberately trying to not say pineapple because he probably knows that, like, they know pineapple's involved, and he might have heard that. And so him being a kid, he doesn't know why pineapple's important, but he doesn't want to say that to seem guilty or whatever. And so you can tell he's like, he wants to say pineapple. You can see he's thinking it, but he doesn't want to say it. Yeah. He's like, oh, pizza or whatever, but did not want to say pineapple. And he also was telling the story about the broken window. They asked him about that. And he's like, yeah, well, one time we were coming home and then the door was locked. And so my dad had to go around and break the window to open it up. Problem with that is the story that John told about that window, he specifically said that the family was gone somewhere and he was alone when that happened. Well, when Burke told the story, he said that we were all there. And so maybe he was prompted to tell that story, but he didn't know that detail. And so those stories are conflicting. Or maybe that happened more than once, so right. You don't know exactly. But there is that angle. And he only appeared one more time after that in public on Dr. Phil. And so there's this whole Dr. Phil interview where he is going over all this stuff. And he's acting really fucking weird. he's smiling the whole time, and it's just like maybe he's just an awkward guy. You can't read into these looks sometimes. But is there any thoughts you have on maybe the brother had done it?
So with the brother, to be honest with you, I think it might be more plausible that it was the brother than the parents. Like the brother actually killed her, and then the parents may have helped him cover it up. Mm-hmm. I think as far as the act goes, I think it's more possible that the brother may have done it out of roughhousing with her or whatever may have happened. But at the end of the day, we're talking about like a 9-year-old kid that's scary for anyone, dude. Like, anyone would be quaking in their boots. Full-grown adults, if they're being questioned from the homicide about somebody dying, let alone your family member, mm-hmm. and then you bring a kid into it who's probably seen, like, Home Alone and other crazy shit, and he's probably like, damn, I don't know what to say here, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm sure he had... I didn't see that interview. Was there an attorney with him in there?
No, I don't think so. Not visible on camera.
Were his parents in there with him?
Well, I'm sure they follow the protocols. I mean, if the parents lawyered up right away, I'm sure that the lawyers were involved in the decision to have the kid questioned, right? Sure. So, I'm sure it wasn't like it mishandled like that, but
yeah. I'm just surprised that the attorney wouldn't be in the room too and just be like, he's not going to answer that mm-hmm. or something. You know what I mean? But I don't know, man. I don't, with the brother, the problem that I have with the brother doing it is, again, it would have to, and this may be the most plausible. I mean, you tell me what your thought is, but it's plausible that the brother did kill her, and it was on accident. So the parents are like, okay, we're going to cover it up, and maybe, the parents, as he's grown up, they tell him a certain story so he believes it, so he doesn't go off the rails because he killed his sister or something, right? Like say, well, no, she came at you and you pushed her away accidentally and she died, and that's just how it is. We're going to leave it at that, right? Like, who knows? But I think that's a more plausible one. As far as like accidental, I don't think there would have been any aggression, like specific aggression to kill her. But I can absolutely see like two siblings arguing, or like I said, roughhousing, or just not knowing your own strength, not knowing what's around you. Push happens, whatever it may be, fall down the stairs, whatever, and she's dead. Mm-hmm. And, maybe he pushed her down the stairs and she died, and so they move her in the room downstairs, whatever it may be, right? And again, this all goes back to how important it is to do your scene correctly, because who knows, maybe there was DNA going down the stairs of her hair or something showing that did happen, or whatever. But I think it's more possible, to be honest with you, than the parents. But just accidental, like I said, I don't think if he did do it, I don't think he meant any ill will out of the action.
Probably not.
I don't think it was anything that was like, you know what I mean? So
what's interesting is he was 9 at the time, and in that state, you can't be criminally prosecuted if you're under the age of 10. And they probably didn't know that at the time. If that is what happened, they probably didn't look that up to make the decision. But if that is what happened and they would have just been honest about it, then he wouldn't have been charged anyways, So
yeah, the only problem with that though is if they moved her in any way, they would have tampered with the body, and you can get charged for that.
Right. So I mean? That's why I said, by the time that they may have learned that, then they probably were too deep anyways.
Right.
But that'd be an interesting thing where, imagine if that did happen, they did cover it up, and then their attorney says, well, if you wouldn't have done anything, then it would have been fine because the law says that we can't prosecute. But now you've tried to hide a crime at this point now, and so you're too late now.
We're in it, man. Yeah. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's pretty much it for the brother. Now, lastly, the other theory is that an intruder actually did do it, which I feel like you are on that side more than anything.
Yeah.
So what, besides the DNA alone, what are some of the main reasons you think someone else did it?
Yeah, so they brought in that detective guy. Do you remember that? They called in the big shot from a different department who's like, this guy's like Inspector Gadget. Like he's done everything. He's been there, done that. So they bring him in, and pretty quickly he was like, I don't think it was the parents. Like he was pretty much against the idea that it was the Ramseys, which obviously went against what the department was, at least the way the documentary made it sound, was the department was kind of pointing fingers at the Ramseys. And the way they construed what the department's intentions were to bring this guy in and get them on their boat too. Except he went the opposite direction, and clearly they didn't like that. Or they, like I said, they made it look like they didn't like that. And one of his big things was the grate on the outside of the window that leads into the basement. Because they're like, well, no one can fit down there. And the guy's like, well, I'm taller than shit, and I can show you that I can do it at my age. And at the time, he was like in his 60s. So he opens the grate up, fits right in there, no problem, and pushes the window in. And he's like, yeah, I can easily fit in there. I mean, it was at least a 2-foot gap that he could have squeezed in to get down there. The other thing he pointed out was the way the weeds grew under the grate, like it was moved. Like it was, the grass wasn't like overgrown from it, like it was over the grass.
Right.
Like it was recently moved. Now, does that mean the dad may not have done that to help cover it up? Who knows, right? But there was also dirt on the suitcase on the basement, like somebody had come in from that egress window. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot for me to look at and be like, okay, I mean, it's hard to, I keep going in circles, and I don't, but unless the dad did that on purpose to like make it look like somebody had come in, or if they came up with that hypothesis to kind of like throw a red herring down the way, the guy was like, there's the DNA, the entrance able to get into the house just like that, no problem. Really was kind of the more deciding factors for me, let alone they had this, I don't know if you plan on talking about the psycho dude.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that in a second. But he had some good points to be like, you got the DNA that points not to the Ramseys. You got the entrance to the window. Just other things that there's just too much for me to be like, okay, that to me seems more plausible. And way at the end, they mentioned, oh yeah, by the way, some psycho has been breaking into houses, going after girls around the same age in the area, in the general vicinity. So it's like, okay, like that to me makes it more plausible that some pedophile is out attacking houses looking for girls of her age. And she was a dancer. They made it seem like she was actually fairly successful at doing these, dress up dance. Yeah, pageants, whatever the hell they're called. And it would have been easy for a pedophile in the area to be like, yeah, I'm going to find out where she lives.
Yeah, she's probably in newspapers and things.
Probably. And so, I mean, if they're that rich, people probably know where the Benets are in the area. Or the Ramseys, I should say. So there was just too much to be like, yeah. I mean, there's so much that points to somebody else being involved to do that. The only thing that I thought was strange, which did kind of make sense to me, was they pointed out the layout of the house. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And they're like, for a stranger to go into the house, the way it was set up was it's not just your average split level where you just walk up the stairs and, okay, we got 3 bedrooms here. It's like they had to go up the stairs, through the kitchen, up like a spiral, over like some fucking yonder crow's nest to get to her room.
Yeah.
Like, and they would have to do that. I don't know how quick. I mean, I'm sure they were super quiet if it was a stranger, but like to be able to know where you're going and not like wake somebody up or cause a disturbance. I guess they could look up blueprints of the house. I mean, it's not hard to find like county records of things and square footage of houses. And I mean, this was the 90s, so you can't just Zillow. But I'm sure they could find, if they really wanted to get in there, I'm sure they could find records of the house and how it was built and stuff. But yes, that's why I'm on that track of it being a stranger.
Yeah, and there is some evidence, I guess, to support that. So they mentioned that they had some kind of guest house where they went and investigated that, and there was like a piece of rope in there. And I don't know if it's the same rope that was tied around the paintbrush or whatever, but there was like some rope that did not belong to the Ramseys. So it like indicated that maybe somebody was staking out the house in this guest house, and they probably don't go in there all the time,
Right.
so it's possible they were there for a while. So that is totally possible. Also, who's to say they didn't go through any other windows in the house, like maybe directly through Jonbenet's window.
Yeah.
So that's possible too. It also could be someone that they knew that was familiar with the house, because they do keep harping on how weird this house is.
Yeah.
Which is hard to imagine, but this is like a straight up mansion, I'm pretty sure. So
Yeah,
like,
it's a big house.
because it's like,
Yeah.
any house that a normal person lives in, it's pretty understandable.
Yeah.
But I think that this is just like a maze of a house.
Yeah.
And so, but maybe it's someone that's been there before and did that. So, you can't rule that out. Also, that suitcase you mentioned, which was positioned just by that broken window, which is the potential entry point, and that cop thinks that is the entry point, also didn't belong to the Ramseys as well.
Yep.
So, like, there is evidence to believe that there's stuff there that didn't belong there that would have had to come from an intruder. Now, when you said psycho guy, I thought about the guy in that third episode where he like literally was talking to the
Yes.
police and claimed to have done it. So there was this guy
Yes.
that he like masked where he's calling from and stuff, so nobody knew who it was that was calling, but basically was confessing to the whole thing. And he said that somehow he like had a relationship with Jonbenet, and like so she was familiar with him, and so maybe that explains why like she was able to be woken up without her freaking out about some stranger, because like they were familiar with each other. And
Which
it
is
was
fucking creepy.
Yeah, it is.
So,
Yeah, it is
dude,
creepy.
That's like,
But then, like, he claimed that it was some, like, sex act where, like she let him put the thing on. It was a special necklace, and then, like, he went too far and she died. And
Right.
so he was claiming that he did it. And to the point where this was around the time when Patsy was dying of cancer, and she was in the hospital basically on her deathbed. And he kept asking to like speak with her, and then they ended up never being able to have that conversation. But he totally was taking credit for it. And when you hear, this is like some of the most chilling phone calls that I've ever heard in my life. Listen, like it was very, very crazy. But like in a way, I mean, you believe him, but then you got to think like some people are just like
nuts.
insane, and so he could just be making this whole thing up. Now they do end up finding this guy in like Thailand or something,
Asia.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. And he's like teaching English at some school, right? And so he probably was just like a pedophile who knows whether or not he actually did it. But that was very remarkable, where this guy literally was taking credit for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't recall, because it's been some weeks now since I watched it. Maybe you'll know. But wasn't there some information that he knew about Jonbenet that only someone that knew her would actually know?
Yeah, I forgot. It was like a nickname or something, I'm pretty
yeah.
sure. And he said, if you don't believe me, ask John about this nickname or something.
Yeah.
That only the family would know about or something. But then they DNA tested him, and it didn't match with...
Oh, that's right, yeah.
It didn't match with the DNA on her.
Yes.
So they're like...
And that's when they said, well, but maybe the DNA was tampered with or whatever. So...
Right.
And that's what makes it frustrating. Is like, I mean, that should be it. You'd be like, okay, this is the guy, but then like he gets cleared of it. So, yeah. I mean, that's the only evidence I can think of for having an intruder do it.
Yeah.
But then again, it's like, what a weird. The note doesn't really fit in completely with any of the theories. Like,
No.
if it's an intruder, like, it still doesn't make sense to do that. Because it definitely wasn't this organization. Like,
Absolutely not. No.
so, like, why would you go through all that effort just to leave the body in the basement like that? Like,
Right.
How does that letter serve an intruder?
Correct. Yeah, I don't know, man. I look, the end of the day, it'll come down to, I mean, if it was the parents, I mean, or just the brother, John knows, like, and he'll have to go to that with his grave, right? That is how it is. It is what it is, and I just think that if the initial investigation was fantastic, I think they would have found their killer. I think it would have been way better to just, instead of just treating it like a kidnapping, like I said, I'm pretty sure they left the scene for a little bit and then came back, which is like a big no-no.
Yeah.
Okay. Just the amount of, just issues with it. And if it was the Ramseys, luckily for them, they didn't, there were so many problems going into that they got away with it. But if it wasn't them and, their killer's still out there, then he'll never, I don't know if it'll ever be found. Now, who knows? In 10 years, they could come up with more evidence tools to find who it was, right? I mean, even nowadays, they're exonerating people from 25 years ago that were claimed to have murdered somebody. And one thing that it brought up was there was a guy in a hospital bed the night before, and some chick, I can't remember the exact case. I'll think about it at a later time if we talk true crime again. But essentially, the guy was in the hospital, got released. Woman on like the other side of the state or something like that was found dead, wrapped in a hospital bed sheet, and his DNA was on it. Well, the problem is that the hospital never washed the damn sheets. That's why his DNA was in the bed sheets. And essentially they're like, well, if you didn't kill her, how is this sheet with your DNA on it wrapped around her body? And essentially he got convicted. Well, they later found out those facts and then exonerated him, right? What a horrible way, too. Like, you waste 30 years of your life in prison. Can you imagine, bro?
And then they just give you a little bit of money.
Yeah, here's $1 million.
You have to do a press conference. They always try to make it seem like the experience bettered them somehow. Like, dude. They're never, like, in these interviews, they're never pissed off. They're always just like, yeah, thank God. They're just, like, always just thankful and just not mad. Like, I'd be so mad.
Yeah,
like,
dude.
I wouldn't even want to give a press conference.
No.
But they always do, and they're just like...
You're like 65
they're
when
all
you get
humble.
out, and you're like, I missed everything. Like,
yeah, Jesus,
I don't
dude.
know what's happening
That's
in life.
terrifying.
What's an iPhone? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what the hell this is. You know what I mean? Like, so...
That's why you get a lawyer.
That's why you lawyer up. But anyway, is there anything else you wanted to add to this? Like,
no, that's it, man.
Okay.
That's all. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, we appreciate you guys listening to our podcast. We hope you liked that true crime episode. Next week, we have a special episode with a special guest. So please join us for that, and we will talk with you guys later. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for watching.